Pressure is mounting to clean up the state's quasi-public agencies. Mismanagement and questionable deals have prompted the governor to take action, but is it enough? Plus, how to create economic development in Connecticut with private-public partnerships. Gun violence and mass shootings. Connecticut was the first state to pass the red flag law. Why other states want to do the same thing. And is Connecticut going to have a third and fourth casino? Why some lawmakers want to roll the dice. All that this Sunday on Face the State.
From Eyewitness News, Connecticut's most watched local political program, this is Face the State.
Good morning and welcome to Face the State. I'm Susan Raff. Connecticut's quasi-public agencies are under intense scrutiny. The chairman of the Port Authority has resigned and the governor has brought in someone to make it right. David Leeman is the new commissioner for the Department of Economic Development, and David's deputy is now in charge, trying to make things better and clean it up. Thank you for joining us on Face the State.
Thank you for having me here.
What is the goal? What do you hope that David Corus can do for the Port Authority?
Sure. So with all things where the government's involved, including quasis, I think accountability and transparency is very important. I mean, taxpayer money is being spent, so it's important that there is good governance and good transparency to the public and all things, including the Port Authority. David Corus, deputy of DECD, is now the acting chair of the Port Authority, and he has significant experience. He was involved in the wind deal, and I think his experience in government in the Port Authority and beyond, will be really additive. I had a chance to look at to review the hearing a couple days ago in Hartford, and I think David articulated, what the governor wants to do in terms of cleaning up some of the steps that are being taken to involve OPM, to involve an outside auditor, and I think it's really important that we take bold action, and I think that's what Governor Leeman is doing.
Right, and you're fairly new, but you're aware now, the Connecticut Lottery has had some issues
Sure.
with that, and some feel, they are private to a certain degree. They don't necessarily get taxpayer money, although the lottery is supported by taxpayers, obviously, who buy lottery tickets, but that they're operating in a vacuum. That's been the criticism, that they are spending money, high salaries, and there's not enough checks and balances and a close eye watch.
Yeah, again, I think it's really important where there's taxpayer money involved in these quasis that there is accountability, there is transparency, and there is good governance. Similar to the private sector, there needs to be great governance at the board level and throughout the organization. And when there's not, there needs to be change. And I think, I'm not as close to the specifics of the Connecticut Lottery with that regard, Susan, but I think it's really important that there is that transparency and feeling of ownership and accountability. The reason for quasis, in my mind, or one of the reasons, is the ability to be a bit more nimble, to avoid bureaucracy, to act quickly and move quicker than maybe the government can do. I do think that's an important benefit, but you need to have that benefit without giving up the accountability and transparency that I think is demanded with taxpayer dollars.
Since the governor has been in office, he's talked a lot about public-private partnerships, and that can often be the benefit for these quasis, right? Because they can not necessarily cut through the red tape, but they have more board members who are more business savvy. They've come from the private sector. You've come from the private sector. And yet, how can you do that without, eroding people's trust that they're doing things without people knowing what they're doing?
Again, this really comes down to the reporting and the governance structure that's in place for a specific organization, whether it's a quasi, whether it's technically a public-private partnership or not. I think when I think about public-private partnerships, there's a couple different flavors with which that can take. Typically, there can be, at a board level, there can be both public appointees as well as private appointees. But more importantly, the funding dollars, whether it's operating expenses or for capital expenses at a specific organization, in many public-private partnerships, the private sector is footing most or all of that bill. So that's an important benefit when you do a public-private partnership. You have private sector know-how, but also private sector capital alongside the public capital. And there's a cost-benefit analysis that needs to be done when you're setting up a partnership like that. Does it make sense to involve the private sector? Is there more cost or less cost? Is there more efficiency? But you definitely benefit from less state dollars at risk, and you have the private dollars, and you have some of that private expertise, which I think can be very complementary.
I want to focus on economic development. Everybody in Connecticut knows we need more of it. You know, every state does. Governor Malloy did his first 5 program, which expanded to several more companies, giving money. It's a competitive world out there, right? A lot of states, want businesses to come. What can you do differently to try to encourage businesses to come here?
Sure. First off, you mentioned first 5, so let me just touch base a bit on incentives, because I do think in the Lamont administration, we are taking a different tact, and it's generally what I would call earn as you go incentives. So as opposed to providing loans up front, forgivable loans or grants, we're going to be really focused on providing incentives for new job creation or new capital investment in the state. When those jobs are created or when the private sector puts forth their dollars to create that new factory or that new office building. Incentives, there does need to be an incentive program because all other states have it. It's a very competitive market, but I think we can do it where there is less risk to those taxpayer dollars. It's earned when the new revenue or the new investment comes to the state, that some of that revenue is shared back with the private sector participant. And again, importantly, we want to make sure we're also focusing on businesses and industries that grow the state's economy. We want to be very strategic and targeted and proactive here, industries that have a comparative advantage in the state of Connecticut.
One of the things that I think Connecticut faces the dilemma is that, it's hard enough to bring companies here, but people who want to live here. I recently went down south, went to Greenville, South Carolina. I think they're the 4th fastest growing state or city in the country. And they've invested quite a bit in their cities, and Connecticut really hasn't. So what happens when you're encouraging people to come here, businesses, but people may not want to live here, especially young people?
Yeah, and so we need to do a lot better in terms of migration and being an attractive place. So I think the focus, maybe going back to your first question a bit, the focus on creating that economic development is creating the right environment. It's creating the right infrastructure, the right cities, the right workforce programs. I think we want to focus less on providing money to a discrete company. Again, we'll have incentive programs that are targeted, but we want to really spend our dollars, spend our time and effort, I think, on creating this environment, this place that is attractive, not just to live, but to also work and to play. If you look at cities that have done this well, they are investing significantly in infrastructure, in housing, in the right environment where, people feel like they're, and this is not just young people. I think there's this perception that this is a millennial thing. I don't believe that. I think this is from young to old. We need to create environments in Connecticut, in our cities as well, that are attractive. So I think having a longer-term plan, an urban plan for our biggest cities is really important. And I really want to encourage growth in those cities and investment. I think that's a key part of our future.
Right, and the incentives, and they can be hundreds of millions of dollars, are really contingent upon jobs and growth. We saw something recently, a company in South Windsor that is going to renege and not be able to pay back the money to the state that they got. What do you do then?
Yeah, and I think when you, in the state historically has given out a lot of money in the form of loans to certain businesses, and the reality is in business, you're going to come across bad times, especially if you give out a significant number of loans to different businesses. That's just the nature of business. I think in how we're thinking about incentives under the Leeman administration, we're going to do it on this earn-as-you-go basis. So that new money needs to come to the state before some of that is shared with the business. So we in the Leeman administration, we would not be exposed to that business risk per se. We're going to really focus on incentives in one area, and we're going to let the pros do the investing in businesses in another area. Sounds
like you have a lot of work to do.
I do. It's been, I'm almost 6 months in the job, but it's been very busy and very exciting. But I think we have a great opportunity ahead of us. Well,
thank you for joining us on Face the State, and we hope to have you back again.
Thank you, Susan. Appreciate it.
Taking action to prevent more mass shootings, why Democrats and Republicans are looking at Connecticut for answers. Plus, you can always watch Face the State on YouTube. We will be right back.